Thanks, Anne.
All right, welcome everybody to the February meeting of the Colleagues of Calligraphy. It's cold and chilly up here in Fargo, North Dakota, but the welcome is warm, and we have an absolutely wonderful evening planned. And those of you that haven't signed up for the workshop this weekend, there's 2 spots left. You may want to jump in. And we'll introduce our speaker a little later. So our president is on a Valentine's Day date today. So I'm pinch hitting here. So happy Valentine's, everybody. And it's absolutely perfect that we're spending the weekend thinking about poetry in motion, thinking about the poetic pen. We're thinking about gentleness and kindness. And we're doing that all with the inimitable Heather Held. So some service opportunities. I'm busy putting together the final schedule for Maker U. My plan is to have that out on Monday. So if anybody wants to teach a class for Maker U, let me know. 2025, we've got 4 board positions that are still open. And if you have a heart for service, if you see an opportunity to be able to help our organization, please speak to myself, speak to Sally, speak to any of the other board members that are on this call this evening. And we'd love to tell you what's involved and how we can help keep our organization going and growing. Don't forget about the member-only webpage. Don't forget there's a whole section on there about mentoring. And fairly soon, we're going to see some work that Sally's been doing around a members Padlet that is extremely exciting. So we keep adding value and collateral for you as a member to help enrich your experience, help grow your calligraphic journey. So again, if you're not sure how to get onto the members only webpage, reach out to Sally, myself. We'll definitely help you out there. We are an organization that has become dependent on social media, and that includes email. So if you're not getting a newsletter and you're a member, check your spam. We don't send paper newsletters. We haven't for a few years now. So all of the newsletters, all of the communications are going to be coming from a colleaguesofcalligraphy.com website. Sometimes they come from me, sometimes they come from Sally, sometimes they come from the president. So make sure that's not going into your spam folder because you're missing out on some of the good stuff. And then do like our Facebook page as well as our Instagram. Instagram, we have a slightly different flavor going on there than we do on our Facebook. We're trying to keep the Facebook more about what's coming up in terms of events and meetings. And then Instagram is a little more show and share, a little more flair. So go and have a look at both of those, like them. And when you see stuff that you think is interesting, share it. Sharing is caring in this social media world. Trading cards. The rule around trading cards is get them in the mail by the 11th of each month. This was the article that Patricia Paola wrote for Bound and Leaded about our trading card program. And if you're trying to figure out what trading cards are, they are 3.5 by 2.5-inch pieces of happiness. You don't have to do 100. You can do 2. You can do 4. You can do 6. I typically do 9 or 11 every month. And there are months in my life where the only art I do is my trading card because life just gets in the way of everything else. So each month we have a theme or we don't have a theme. So February, The trading cards are piling up on my dining room. I'm so excited. I just came back from a business trip, so I'm really excited to start looking at them. February is your choice. And unless you're going to get them to me by Wednesday next week, you want to be working on your March trading cards. And March the theme is words, words, words. Think about Eliza Doolittle. Words, words, words. I'm so sick of words. That's the idea. So for us being calligraphers, it's right in our wheelhouse. April, your choice of theme. And then May is, again, the whole year we're stealing from musicals. The theme is It's May. So think about Camelot. It's May, that lusty month of May, and everybody's running in a meadow, and there's flowers, and it's just delightful and it's wonderful. So your May theme could be that maybe some Italian hand, some flowers, some whimsy. So trading cards, 2.5 by 3.5 inches of sheer pleasure and practice. And if you want more information, reach out to me. I'm teaching a decorated letters class coming up in February 21st. Those of you that are teachers that want us to announce your classes as part of our monthly meetings, please be sure to send that information to me, and we will include it. So this is going to be a Zoom class, and you can register through Moorhead Community Edge, which means thank you, State of Minnesota. They're subsidizing public education. So February 15 and 15. February 15 and 16 is our workshop with Heather. It's 2 mornings. If you want to jump in and you haven't signed up yet, please do. This is a class I have long yearned for. Then March 15th and 16th is going to be our Makers U Friday night. And we'll look at that in a little more detail as my Kesek. And then Saturday is our workshop programs. April 20th is an in-person meeting. So yay, we get off of Zoom, the weather warms up, everybody comes out of their caves, and we're going to be meeting with Janie Weston at the Bell Library. And she has asked them to pull some of their manuscripts and documents from their collection. And she's going to lead us through a workshop on analyzing a calligraphic hand using original sources. So a rare and wonderful opportunity not to be missed. May 18th is our in-person meeting at the Highland Park Library. And then over the summer, we're going to go a little quiet. September, we're going to be kicking off our year. And then October, Jean Formo, sorry, spelling mistake, will be leading us in a pencil calligraphy workshop. And we are terribly, terribly excited to have Jean teaching for us once again. She is nationally renowned. You talk to a lot of people, they have learned from Jean, and she's within our calligraphic community here, and just a powerhouse of knowledge and wisdom. So we are busy inside of Colleagues of Calligraphy, and excited to have you join us. So this evening, we are going to be going through an instructor lecture here with Heather. And then tomorrow we start the workshop of the poetic pen. A commonly asked question I've had is, I've never used a pointed pen. And Heather rates this class beginners through advanced. And with her gentleness and her kindness, I would not be nervous. She was the person who took me to the dark side with pointed pen, because it had never been a tool I ever wanted to use. And you just need a straight holder. You don't need a fancy oblique holder, and a pointed nib and some ink and some paper. So just a really, really nice roll into using pointed pen. Makers University, March 15th and 16th. Mike Kessig is going to be talking about modernizing pointed pen scripts. Mike comes from a very traditional, engrossing background. And so when he cuts loose and starts playing with scripts, taking an unshill and pulling it apart and putting it back together with pointed pen, or doing the same with things like copperplate, you end up with these really creative, bouncy, loose, dancing types of letters. So that is going to be an amazing lecture, and free for our members, $5 for non-members. And so sign up for that and enjoy. So any other announcements from anybody who's online here and have events or opportunities to share? Any questions? Awesome. All right. So welcome to Heather. She has been a friend of the Colleagues of Calligraphy for quite some time. And she was one of the reasons why I became workshop chair a few years ago, because I wanted to do a class from Heather. And I reckon the only way I could ever get to do a class with Heather was if the colleagues hosted it, and to have the colleagues hosted it, I needed to become workshop chair. So any of you wondering how you can help your own calligraphic journey is step up and become program chair or workshop chair, because then you kind of get to do the things you want to do. Heather is, she lives up in Canada. She's a freelance lettering artist, and her business is called the Victorian Pen Studio. She's in St. George, Ontario. When Michael Saul was with us in October, you probably heard him mention Heather often, because she has studied with many of the master penmans, and she's now teaching and creating a whole new following of pointed pen artists. In 2009, she was the recipient of the Spencerian Heritage Award given through Michael Saul at the Spencerian Saga. She's a longtime member of Master Penman Brian Walker's Spencerian Review Study Group. She's active in class, the Copperplate Special Interest Group, and a faculty member of several international calligraphy conferences. Her bio talks about her being a gentle teacher, and her style and her grace make pointed pen calligraphy feel very gentle and very smooth. So for those of you that are a little hesitant stepping out of the chisel pen world, Heather's the one to take your hand and guide you down the woodland path. And we are just absolutely thrilled to have you with us again, Heather. And at this point in time, I will stop my share and hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. I think you should narrate a book. You've got this peaceful voice, and it's so calming, and I don't know, you should be narrating books. Anyway, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for hosting. And I'm just going to piggyback on what Anne said. For anybody who is hesitant to pick up a pointed pen or hasn't done it before, Italian hand is your entry-level hand. It is the one I wish every student would have as a foundation before they do any other script hand. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that in the lecture. And Anne mentioned two people that I tear up whenever they're mentioned, and one is Michael Saul and the other is Brian Walker. And Brian Walker passed away in 2018, and he was really a mentor to me, and one who really encouraged my study of Italian hand, because back when I started studying it, this was not a popular hand at all. It was kind of laughed at. It wasn't looked at with any sort of respect. It certainly has gained a lot of respect over the years. But Brian was very cheered me on all the way, and it's not a day in my studio I don't miss Brian. And Michael Saul, I never really teach a class, a workshop that's in lettering or flourishing without thanking him, because without Michael, I never would have taught anything. He found the voice of the introvert in me and encouraged me to teach. I am an absolute introvert. In fact, when I taught my first conference at IAMPIS, behind the tablecloth that was in front of the table, my knees were knocking together. I was shaking so hard. But those two men really mentored me and encouraged me along the way. So I always say thank you before I start to teach. All right, that's enough of that. I'm going to go over to my keynote. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'll probably go back and forth between the two, between the screen and the desktop. And when I'm done the lecture, we're going to do a little bit of hands-on. And Anne talked a little bit about your trading cards. Let's do some tonight. So I went and cut some paper. We're gonna do that. All right, so let me go over to my keynote. Let's get that popped up and ready. I'm going to share my screen. All right, there we go. So you should be able to see that. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute, because I can't see the chat when my screen's in this mode. Please stop me, and I will pause for questions as well. And we're going to talk poetry in motion, the evolution of Italian hand. Let me just grab water. So I started looking at Italian hand between 2010 and 2011. I can't exactly remember the date, but my guild, and Alin Chan is here tonight. She's a member of my Royal City Calligraphy Guild. They were doing a calligraphy event where it was sort of hands from around the world. And for some reason, they told me to do a hand called Italianate. I had no other indication. I was supposed to represent Italy with Italianate hand, and I had never heard of it. And I still don't know really what they meant. But I started researching pointed pen italic, and I'm like, I'm not going to do that. But I found a single page in the Universal Penman, and it became the light that turned on for me. So let me go back here and I'll show you the single image that stopped or started me studying for years. One page. It is page 211 of the Universal Penman, and that was it. There was no instruction. There was no ductus. There was nobody telling me what I was seeing. It was 100% on me to decipher this hand and to figure it out so I could present it to my guild and look like I had a clue about what I was doing. But when I looked at it, I knew I could easily translate that into, a basic script. And that's what I started to do. So we'll go back over here. And that was my lead in. And as far as background goes, I am a florist by trade. So anything flowery, anything soft and gentle. The class is called the Poetic Pen because I really find this poetic nature in Italian hand, something very gentle and graceful. But my training is not as an artist. My training is that of a florist, which is a different type of artist. And I'm also a needle worker. And honestly, I could teach myself. I taught myself knitting, crochet, all kinds of embroidery, even kind of extinct embroidery. If I could look at it, I could usually figure it out. That was not true of calligraphy, where with calligraphy, when I started out, I really needed somebody to tell me a little bit about how a pen worked or how the broad edge pen worked or the pointed pen. which is where Michael and Brian came in and gave me a lot of nurturing. But I was used to be able to look at things and figure it out and find a way to put it on paper. So when it came down to Italian hand, I wanted to find a nurturing way to put my love of flowing nature sort of into the hand itself. So many of the little quotes that I do, I embellish things with offhand flourishing so that you can see those little pointed pen roses and things. I'm always trying to integrate nature and things which are soft into my work. And this, I showed you that page from the Universal Penman. This was one of the very first pages of fooling around with Italian hand that I did. And all I had to do, all that was on my plate, was to find something to present to the guild and talk about it in a way that we could just experiment with this hand together. So I started with this very, very playful approach. Do you notice I didn't start with guidelines? I started on 3-ring binder paper. This is actually archival binder paper. It is very, very old. And it takes the ink beautifully. And I had the most freeing and beautiful time not caring about creating a perfect page. I wanted to get a script into my head. So I started by playing. And this is another page out of a journal. Again, I'm just playing. I don't care about, I'm not caring about a guide sheet. I am not caring about trying to force this into something that it's not. I want to find my way and analyze the script. So, Anne talked about a class or an opportunity you have coming up at a library where you're going to be able to analyze a script and out of a historic source. Finding historic sources for me at the time, other than that page in the Universal Penman, was very, very difficult. Back in 2010, you didn't have Instagram and YouTube videos and everybody posting videos of them working and writing. And there was not the resource of the Pen of Volans site, which I will talk about tomorrow in the workshop, where Sabile has curated a lot of manuscripts that she has seen in person and put them together on that site. That didn't exist. I started trying to collect books, and that takes you back to that image where you see a stack. That's a drop of many of my books. I read the English Writing Masters and their copybooks, which told me almost nothing. English handwriting, I've read portions of that book, but I did a lot of studying and I did a lot of talking to the one person who I think is the greatest living historian of Italian hand, and his name is Don Marsh, and he lives in Cincinnati, and we talk almost every day. And we started talking back and forth about Italian hand and what we observed about the hand. He is a type designer, he's an author, and he's a graphic artist. So he draws Italian hand with a pencil and then he vectorizes it and he sends that out as an image for people to use. Where I wanted to approach it as a writer who wanted to integrate it into my writing skill set. So at that time, I had Spencerian was my default setting. I spent 7 consecutive years solely studying Spencerian script. Broad edge pen did not draw me in at all at that time. But Spencerian was my go-to hand. And after 7 years, I started to integrate other things. I dabbled a little bit in English roundhand, but mainly it was Spencerian. And it wasn't until I saw Italian hand that the whole world of scripts really opened up to me and like a light bulb turned on. So what I'm going to give you tonight, is there any questions so far? Everyone's tracking with me. I'm not boring you to tears. We're all good. So far, so good.
So far, so good. There are no questions in chat either.
Okay. So I am going to present what is a result of my research and what I've how I frame Italian hand in my view. And it is from the period of about 1560 to 1914. And then there's this gap. And then I kind of come in with my own style at that point. We'll talk about that. But this is an image from 1560, and this is the work of Giovanni Francesco Cresci in Italy. And there's not really a single source that you can look at and say, this is where Italian hand started, but you can kind of nod to this one and in this direction. And if you look at, let me just pop this up to about 150. So if we look at those ascenders and the descenders, and you look at the shades of the clubs, the shape of the clubs of the ascenders, that is what made Cresci's work start to look different. This is pure italic, and Italian hand doesn't only mean a region like Italy, a place on the map. It also means italic. And the script itself is based in italic. And you can look at the counter spaces of the A, you can look at the narrow spacing of the U and the N, and that is the beginning of what becomes a script hand further down the road. Now, this is a wood block. So a wood block print is going to give a different impression than a copper plate print. So once the printing method switches over to copper plate prints, you see a little bit more finesse in the shapes of the letter forms themselves. But at the time in 1560, this is already drawing some criticism. So some eyebrows are being raised, and those clubs are looking like it mars or it disfigures the pure italic. And Italian hand as a script draws a little bit of fire from people who are pure italic lovers and those who are pure English roundhand lovers. I think it's got more credibility now than it ever had, but it certainly would raise some eyebrows when you start to add clubs onto your ascenders and descenders in an italic hand and in a script hand, to be honest. So that first image I showed you was from Italy, and this one is 1569, and it is in Belgium. And the difference between the two, not only is the region, but also the printing method. So we are switching from the heaviness that you get in a woodblock print to a copper plate engraving. So there's a little bit more finesse. The letter forms in this image are far more angular and tight. It is pure italic. You can see that there's no joins or very few joins between the letters. It is a italic broad edge or edge quill hand. And the club ascenders are leaning a little bit more intensely to the right. So they're not quite as sort of loose as what Cresci had. And this is also an image from Belgium. And regionally, the hand and those clubbed ascenders and descenders spread all around Europe and through individual writing masters who put their own stamp on it, the hand morphs almost instantly. It is changing constantly. I called this lecture Poetry in Motion because this hand never stops evolving. It continues to evolve. The other thing I want to point out about this particular example is the initial K. And when I was reading through the book, English Writing Masters and their copybooks. And this is a weird book. Let me just pop it under here for a second. So I'm going to pop it under here and I'm going to stop share. This is not an easy book to get a hold of, but if you do get a hold of it, it's a very gossipy book. It tells us all about the good, bad, and the ugly of all of the writing masters. It identifies the name calling between them. And it really I don't know. It's a dark. I would say it's a dark history. But one of the things that Ambrose Heel wrote when he started the introduction is saying that nobody has ever really tried to put down the steps of evolution of any of these script hands, and he even didn't do it when he went through this book. But what the book does is it tells us a little bit about the writing master, and you get a really nice sort of image of them. And then beside it is usually a little bit of their work and how they, whether they were successful or whether they weren't successful. And it is absolutely filled with gossip, tons of gossip. Like if one writing master wanted the other writing master to go to jail because they were making too much money or they were drunk too much. All of that is captured in this book. It's very, very interesting reading. But it also really maintains the mystery of Italian Hand. And if you look at this picture, you see Tommy Tompkins, who is a writing master that we'll talk about, and it has his pen grip. It also has the quill in his hand. And every writing master cut their quill differently and yet failed to tell us how they cut their quill for very deliberate reasons. They did not want their secrets let out. They wanted to charge you as a student to kind of learn from them and only from them. And they continually marketed themselves as the best. So when you go through the book, you definitely see different pen grips from different writing masters. And you also see a little bit of a arrogance in some of the faces, to put it mildly. But it's a very, very interesting book, and there's lots to glean from it if you can get a hold of it. Like I said, it is a very difficult book to get a hold of. So we'll go back here to the lecture. But one of the things that I gleaned from the Writing Master's book was the fact that Italian Hand from day one was taken less seriously, not by the onlooker, but by the writing masters themselves. They're having a bit of a play. They are enjoying the script. They're letting it dance on the page. It is described in the book as playful, joyful, and exuberant. And when we write it as practicing artists now, I'm not writing it with any sense of rigidity. I'm bringing that playful, joyful exuberance to it. So that's what I really gleaned from the Writing Master's book. So this is a image from Giuliantonio Herculani from Italy. And again, this is a copper plate engraving. And incidentally, the first copper plate calligraphic plates were italic. And they were showing off the beauty of the italic hand through those plates. And in it, you see the quill knife, you see different ways of stripping the quill and cutting the quill. And I alluded to that in the book, that every writing master cut their quill a different length. They prepared the slit differently. And there's evidence that for Italian Hand, that the slit is not quite in the center of that quill. But they kept as a trade secret exactly how the point was on that quill and the slit position. So some of the examples we see are done with a broad edge quill without question, and some are an oblique quill. They are not done with a steel pen until far later. And the steel pen cannot exactly do what the quill can do. So we're coming in with materials that we have, and we can't quite do the same things. We can do beautiful things with the pointed pen, but they're going to look a little bit different. And if you look at this example, the club shape of the ascender is changing again, and we're pulling it downward a little bit more. We are constantly merging toward what will become English roundhand. All right, so this is an example from 1618 in England, and it's an example by Martin Billingsley. And once again, observe the K. So when I teach this class, when I teach the poetic pen, I constantly tell my students when you come to the letter K, take a little chance with it, take a risk with it, have a little bit of a play. And also when you're analyzing the different hands, the different exemplars, observe what is done with the letter K. They seem to have a lot of playing that they do with it. Again, it's still purely italic. You have very different shapes in these A's at the beginning of the counter. And I include this image because it's a very important image, and it's also an encouraging image for us. And even the O's. So the counter spaces of those O's are different. And we are human practitioners. We are not machines. And even though the A, the O, the N, these are very important letters in our hand, there's going to be variance. There's going to be variables that happen and that feed into our handwriting. And our end goal is always looking toward creating something beautiful, but not mechanical. We don't have to worry about perfection. It's never an option. It's not going to happen. So we'll just work on creating something beautiful the best we can. The other thing I want you to see is the capitals. And the capitals are here are still kind of rigidly representing the italic forms. You have this lateral shade along the baseline that students in the poetic pen, I will be calling this the Billingsley blob. And we can do this a number of ways, but it is a distinction of the hand that Billingsley gives us that I continue to work with. There's a lot in Billingsley's work that I do refer to when I continue to develop the hand. Billingsley, he's another really fun one. Let's just put it mildly. If you do get a hold of the book and you read the chapter on Billingsley, it's like, what's with this guy? He goes on the attack a lot, but it's quite fun to read. Another example by Billingsley, in this one, the ascenders are actually a little bit taller than the previous image, and he is increasing the weight on the ascenders. But again, if you look at the Q, he's having fun. He's having fun with some of these exuberant flourishes. And we don't have to flourish, but we certainly have the option to flourish. So just another beautiful example. And again, the shade at the bottom of the descenders is now lateral as well. So it's not just this club shape. We've got a pulled motion with the quill from left to right. And there's a way you can manipulate the pointed pen to do that and create this little loop and infill at the same time. You don't have to. There's other ways that we can do it. It's a very forgiving and possible hand. The hand is absolutely filled with possibilities. So I include this image from Jean van de Velde from 1605, and he has a very exuberant hand. I, at no time, worked on his style and his contribution to Italian hand because it really did not appeal to me other than some of the lowercase forms. I think some of his very basic lowercase forms are very appealing. but I don't go for this with all of the sort of lateral and sprawling loops. I know some people look at that and that's what they draw out. For me, I look at that and I avoid it. And I'm kind of putting that in there because you can pick the elements that you want to include in your hand without rigidly adhering to all of the elements. It's very, very forgiving. Van de Velde, an incredibly important practitioner of many hands, and he is continuing to pull the shade downward, and rather than most of them being sort of tilted over to the right, you're getting a heavier shade pulling downward on the ascenders. So Van de Velde again, and I like this example a little bit better. There's some playful, quite honest, some very plain capitals that he gives us, but also some playful capitals. But you've also got the hand position coming over from the right, and this just adds to the confusion of the hand. Again, the writing masters loved to be mysterious about their approach and their technique, and their copybooks with the instructions really, there's very few that we have that exist with any actual instructions. And Ambrose Heels talk about that a lot because the copybook was paper ephemera. It was well used at the time. And once that student learned that particular style, they did not continually go back and practice. They got rid of the copybook. It was either discarded because it was, pretty much destroyed with use, or they just didn't need it because the hand itself was in their head. This accumulation of material and going back over it and over it and over it did not exist the way it does now. So they learned it and they moved on and they developed it as their own hand. So I include this image because, as I said, there's a lot I don't know about Italian hand. There's a lot that I pieced together from my own original research and from discussing a lot with Don Marsh. But I love this image. And again, it just kind of adds to the mystery of the hand. And we get a little bit of an insight into where the slit is and quite the cut of the quill there. Very interesting image. So this is now 1608. We are going up in time, and this is France, and this is the hand of Madereau, Lucas Madereau. And he was a key figure in developing sort of the trade hands that were accepted in France. And I'm going to pop this one way up. So we're going to just go. So look at the shapes of some of the letter forms. Look at the shape of the blot of ink, the roundness, how narrow and almost completely monoline the lower case is. You can see even the join from the M to the I and the join from the M to the M, the spacing is slightly different between the two. And one of the things I do when I talk about how we join letters is we work toward creating an overall harmony in your lettering. So you don't have to think, I must always be exiting at the exact same angle. We don't see it in the examples. We don't see it here. We see them going toward their slant. And by the way, the slant of Italian hand is anywhere from between about 48 degrees to about 60 degrees. So you can make it as slanted or as upright as you want. It is so, so forgiving. But this is a beautiful page of examples. Let's pop it back down to size and go on. All right, so this is an example from Solari in Italy in 1620. And I actually have this book. So I'm going to pop this one under the camera and I'm going to stop sharing and just pause and make sure you're all still with me. Any questions so far? You're all good?
I have a question. This is Janie.
Yes.
The slit being a little bit off to the side, wouldn't it make sense that if you were right-handed, you would have the slit, uh, let's see,
Yeah.
more to the left if you're looking at the pen when you're holding it,
Yeah.
to the paper, it would be a little more to the left.
Yeah. So you, as a quill cutter and as a left-handed quill cutter, you would have that option of being able to put that slit in whatever position that you want. So your letter forms work with your hand and the way that that quill is cut. Yes. However, they also played not only with the slit position, they played with the blunt of the end. So whether that was oblique cut, so whether left oblique cut, right oblique cut, or kind of broad edge, they played with all of that, and writing masters kept those secrets very close. So yes, I would agree with you.
Okay. And wouldn't that be because you're going to apply your pressure on the downstroke and the flow of the ink will be a little more cooperative if you're right-handed, if your slit is a little more on the left. And I'm imagining
Yeah,
how
no,
this might be.
I'm trying to visualize your question. And one of the things that they do is they have, not only do they have different slits in their quill, they have different pen holds. And so you
Yeah,
can,
yeah.
with your pen hold on an upstroke, get shade. So they, depending on how they're actually angling that, and we saw Van de Velde, that one image with him coming in like that, although the pen was like this. But there is evidence that whether the hook of your hand or even manipulating how that pen goes, you can create shades on the upstroke, which explains some of the crazy shading we see. Hope, does that help?
Well, and Heather, do you use natural quills?
I have some, but I don't use them in my writing. So what I do is I work with a pointed steel pen and find a way to add the shades that work with my pen hold and my pen.
Okay.
Yeah. But you can use a quill. You can use, you can take a Mitchell 6 and do different things with the Mitchell 6. There's so many things you can do with this hand that changes it. And I've got more of that coming up in the lecture. That's a great question. Thank you.
Okay.
So the book that I wanted to pull out is one of the early resources I got when I started doing this research. Naturally, this one falls apart. So, okay. And it has a lot of images like this in it. So if I pop this forward, you see different sort of placement of that shade. So whether it really, really carries over heavily to the right, or if it starts to carry further down the stem. But this is a very interesting book. And again, it is more purely rooted in the italic than it is in a script. And my practice of the hand is basically the script, not the italic, and I'll explain that further. But what I wanted you to see with these incredible borders that are pen flourished, these are rendered, these are drawn and then flourished. They're not freely formed. They're too perfect. And whenever back in the time, there was a combination of lettering with this type of flourished border, the onlooker would often suspect bad lettering. So there's especially in Ambrose Heel's book, there is tons and tons of commentary about seeing these types of things side by side and completely dismissing the hand because this is present. It's not fair. It's not true, and but it was certainly part of the thinking. So way back then, that embedding of flourishing, trying to detract from bad lettering, that thought was out there in the world, and that thought still exists. Flourishing can never fix bad lettering. It can distract you a little bit, but it can't fix anything. And flourishing has nothing to do with whether that letter itself is bad or good. So I wanted to point that out, and also want to tell you that this book is easy to find as a secondhand book. It is a really nice resource, and I don't regret having it. I think it's wonderful to look at, and I get inspired. The flourishing, to be honest, doesn't inspire me, but I look at the letters, I get influenced, and then I do my writing. So I wanted to include that in the lecture. So we're going into Barbador, and Barbador was a French writer. This is 1647, and look at the capitals. So our capitals are getting a little bit more scripty. They're still based on the italic, and if I pop this up, you're starting to see joins. So you are, even though this is still italic, we are joining letter to letter. Now look at this word here, amender or something like that. Those are clearly two different E's, where the height of the eyelet is just up a little bit higher here, and it's a little bit narrow there. These writing masters were not giving us perfection. And even throughout the page, look at the spacing here compared to the spacing there. Your writing will evolve. It will change. Your mood changes the writing. What is going around in your environment and changes the writing. Sometimes if I look at too much of this style, I get a very, very different approach to my own hand. It's not a bad thing. It's just something that affects it. And I'm going to flip through my journal at one point and show you how the script changes and evolves. Again, look at the shades. Always look at the shades. All right, this is Edward Cocker. And whenever I think of the name Cocker, I think of cocky, and he was arrogant. He was one that was just filled with self-promotion to the point of cutting all his competitors down. And he has a lot of Italian hand in the book. The shades are getting further and further down. He is pulling letter forms from French cadelles, so you get some mixing. You're starting to see mixing of different hands. You're going to see a little bit more flourishy strokes in the capitals. And this is my favorite Cocker image. He is actually mocking that idea of flourishing being there to detract from bad writing. That he knows that idea. He says he doesn't flourish much, but he really does. There is a lot of flourishing in his work, and the shades are pulling further down. And what I want you to see about this image is the texture that's created on the page. So you're not only going to see the ink lines that you're creating, you can make this look very like a pirate map almost, is what the image that I get in my mind. Whenever I see this, it reminds me of something Johnny Depp should be holding in Pirates of the Caribbean. There's a richness to it, and especially if you did this on an ivory paper with walnut ink, it's like it's transporting you to a different era. But the shades are getting longer, and you notice they're no longer that club that reaches over to the right. I get very excited about this hand, and I love sharing the details about it. Now, look at the top here. This is the same guy. This is Edward Cocker, 1671 in England. And now we are approaching a very loopy script hand. The lowercase is narrow. it's joined. It's considered a semi-angular hand, so it's not quite as rounded as English roundhand, and it's not as angular as Spencerian. But there's mixes of the two that happen. Look how narrow that N is. Little bit too narrow for me, but I love the play that he's having here. For a guy who says he doesn't do a heck of a lot of flourishing, this is insane. The capitals themselves are still not over the top. Where he is flourishing is actually in those ascenders. And this is John Ayres. This is 1698, and this is in England. And when I found John Ayres, a lot of things started to click for me. Notice the A in this image and how much weight you have going into the counter space. The shape of the ascender is completely changed. So no longer that club. We're making this really strange shape, and we are approaching a fully shaded ascender. Look at the capital M. That's a very cursive M. You've got a very plain R there, but the texture is unbelievable. You're also starting to see a mixture of other hands coming in where you've got this solidly shaded, it looks almost like a round text that we're getting there. But he is a very important person in my evolution of the hand. Not this particular image, but definitely his writing is one that I go back to a lot. And this is George Shelley. This is 1709 England. And yes, the image is a little bit blurry, even in the English Writing Master books. And Sibyll's site, the Penevolan site, a lot of the links are no longer active because the British Library was hacked, and anything that was housed on the British Library is still down. It's been down for over a year, but there's still a lot that we can glean, even if the images aren't completely clear. Up at the top, we now have a complete script alphabet. The remnants of italic are pretty much gone. And you've got these beautiful, we are approaching a very interesting script. So to go back to the question that came up a little bit earlier about the quill, I would do this now with the pointed pen starting at the top, and I would shade on the downstroke. And when I come around here, I would shade again. And I've got the control that I can do that. But there is a way that they could go on the upstroke and get reverse shaded letters. I do a few of my capitals with reverse shades, but not many. So it just depends on the letter that you're looking at and where the shading is as to how you're going to approach that letter. Yeah, we'll talk about that a lot more in the workshop, especially on Sunday. But you don't have to reverse shade anything, and you can mix and match capitals. You can take capitals from English roundhand and put them with your Italian hand, and it looks wonderful. We still have the Billingsley blob along the baseline. We've got some really beautiful scripty looking Y's coming in there, a lot of beauty. And what you're going to start to see is a shift between the emphasis being the lowercase, where most of the other images that we looked at, the emphasis is the lowercase, but there comes a transition where the emphasis becomes the uppercase. And once that happens, when you lose the lowercase, you lose the hand. Beautiful image from William Brooks, 1717 in England. And let's pop this up a bit and look at that. This is stunning script. And by the way, this will be the easiest X you ever do in your life as a script hand. I use it even in my Spencerian. I prefer it. Again, you see these very narrow letter forms, but a grace, an incredible grace to this script. It's almost at the point where this is where I'm starting to base my hand on these types of letter forms. It's almost, but not quite. I love this image. So let me just knock this back because all right. So Italian hand was given to the ladies of, well, specifically Great Britain here in this note, but it was considered so simple, so easy that the ladies could do it. And this is the translation of the text that we have on the page, which says, "To the ladies of Great Britain, as I have largely provided for the instruction of those of my own sex in the art of fair writing, so I esteem it my duty to endeavor every perfection of your qualifications by presenting you with an imitable specimen of the Italian hand, which as your own I recommend to your choice and practice, being full of beauty, ornament, and delight, and invented for the sole use and embellishment of your fair sex, and am your humble servant, William Brooks." So William Brooks believed that this was designed for women because it was so feminine, it was beautiful and ornamental. And in fact, at the time, if a man had a hand as beautiful as this, as writing, who wasn't a writing master, they suspected him to be on the feminine side or a tradesman, or downgraded his life to that of a tradesman if they had beautiful flowing writing like this. So bearing in mind what William Brooks just said, and if I pop this up, look at the why. So he's telling us as women that this should be one of the easiest, most beautiful letters that we could do. On my best day, I've never been able to do that why. It's stunning, and it is becoming one of the most stunning scripts that I've ever seen, I've ever come in contact with, and I remain passionate about, despite what William Brooks kind of gave us a bit of a backhanded compliment there. So this is round text and George Bickham, and where English roundhand starts to take over Italian hand. Italian hand, of all the script hands, had nearly 400 years of use before it drops out of existence. And that is longer than other script hands. Other script hands are younger. And Bickham, and you may be familiar with the universal penman, which I showed you earlier. Bickham starts to combine Italian hand with round hand the way we italicize things. So he is using it to draw a different emphasis when he uses Italian hand. And round text, whenever you see the word text next to round or next to Italian, it just means larger. So it's usually meant for a title. It's usually bolder. It's just a little bit bigger in size. It's the exact same as round hand, but bigger. And the same is true of round text. And that leads me to my second most important image, if I can pull it, was from a little book called The Young Clerk's Assistant. And again, if you don't get the Universal Penman, if you don't get any of the other resources I recommend, this is the one that everything I gleaned in the beginning from the hand came from 2 pages in this book and not an ounce of instruction. So page 32 and page 29 are the 2 most important pages of this book. And we talk about this at length in our workshop, but side by side, we have round text and Italian text. So you may be more familiar with round hand, English round hand, with the terminology of the word copper plate. And I rarely use that word because it's not as descriptive as understanding that this is English round hand, which is very descriptive. Where copper plate, you know, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So you can see the differences in the size of the letters and in the spacing. You can see the differences in the shade position. And that's all I needed. So from this page and this page, and observing and practicing and enjoying, I put together the Poetic Pen the way it is today. It continues to evolve. It evolves every time I pick up the pen. It really does. But it certainly has a familiar sense to me based on what I saw on page 32 and page 29. And I went crazy. I think because this was really the first time I was making my own discoveries with a script hand and not having a teacher telling me what I'm looking at. I was the one trying to make the discovery and trying to naturalize this with my own writing. And it was very, very exciting for me. And again, I'm indebted to my own guild for that hunt and for that practice. So I've got those images blown up here, and I practice in the handouts for Poetic Pen. There's a section where we're just practicing ladies' names or men's names or names of cookies or something, because I love just writing and seeing what happens on the page without having important text to write. And then we get to Thomas Tomkins, and I showed you his picture and his pen grip in the Ambrose Heel book. And what I think is probably the prettiest K I've ever seen in my life. And we'll pop it up so we can really look at the letters now. So we see an incredibly chiseled hand. It is graceful. You can see these tiny little loops. Those are actually infilled loops. I do it with pressure. But the K, I think it is, honestly, I've never in my life seen a prettier K. Look at that little terminal lobe. We've got the R-shaped exit, and the grace and the beauty of this example, it has just been so inspiring. And if I knock this back down to 100, you can see that it is combined with a Gothic text. So Italian hand can be mixed with italic, with English round hand, or a rounded sort of Gothic like that. It will stand up to other hands. It does so much. And like I said, it is definitely an easier hand than English round hand and far easier than Spencerian. But again, if I pop this up, and if you look at the base of the R, that's actually created by creating a little eyelet that you pressurize on the way up to get that infill. And it's easier than it sounds. But again, some of the most beautiful writing. And I've got the book that comes from as well. But this book is very hard to get a hold of. Sorry, is there a question there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go back to what you just showed.
Sure.
Yes. When you zoomed in on that tiny little script at the bottom in the middle where it says Tompkins scribe or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
But it has Ashby.
Sculpt. Yeah.
Yes. So Ashby, I assume, was the person that carved the copper plate for this.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
This is wonderful that you actually get the credit for the person that did the other half of it.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to get to even more exciting because Tompkins did the writing and Ashby, or I'm assuming that's Ashby, did the, so script is the writer, sculpt is the engraver. But there's a practitioner coming up that does both. He is not only the writer, he's also the engraver. And to me, he is even more skilled than George Bickham. So yes. And one of the things that happens over the years with script writing, one of the things that comes up in books that make me so angry is the fact that the writer itself is capable of nothing, and it's the engraver that makes this work. That is not true, because the when you actually study the job of the engraver, if they are off at all from what the writer did, the writer would have their head, because the writer wants this letter an exact way, and the engraver is actually not even seeing the whole thing as he's kind of unveiling it and doing the carving of it, like the engraving of it. I watched an incredible movie about that, like a documentary, and it's just like, wow. So all of this time that was kind of thrown into the script, the pointed pen world, that it's the engraver's talent and not the writer, that was all blown away. Both of them had to do their jobs incredibly well for this to work.
I agree.
Yeah. And that's a great, I'm glad you saw that. I'm glad you saw that. Sorry, that was my little soapbox. I'll get off my soapbox and I'll come down and we'll look at this book. So this is the Tompkins and Milnes Ornamental Penmanship book. I did not check the Pen of Woolens website, but at one point, this was available for you to go in and study and download whatever pages that you wanted from the book, because it is out of print and can be pricey. But it's a wonderful resource. And I've just, that one image, just the K, and just studying what was in that one plate was a lot of inspiration. So highly recommended if you can get a copy. If you can get a copy between $50 and $75, you've done very well for this book. And I had mine actually rebound at the store, so I could open it up and lay it flat and really study and use this book. All right, so how we doing? We're doing well. Okay. So where am I? Yeah, and so this is just, again, another enlargement of that K. And I think it is interesting that the playfulness of that letter, again, once again, is the K. It's gorgeous. This, to me, I think this is probably the most beautiful example of Italian hand I've seen. I just love it. This is from William Mills, and Tompkins and Mills are the two penmen who appear in this book. And again, you are starting to see the difference, or a kind of a takeover of the hand. So it is pure script at this point. It's very gentle. That shade is interrupted. So we are not getting a fully pulled shade that you do in English round hand. It's interrupted, so it's gentler. It's less fatiguing to do. You will not get, I can write Italian hand for hours and hours without fatigue. Other hands, it depends. It can give me a little bit of fatigue. And this one, Milnes did the script, and again with Ashby doing the engraving. Gorgeous. It's absolutely stunning. Okay, let me back out. So here's that image. Here's the image. So this is Italian hand by Jules Girault. And let's enlarge this, because look at the bottom. Get there. Girault does the script and the sculpt. He's doing both, and he is incredible. So one of the things that I noticed about Girault was his Italian hand, the lower case was a little bit wider. So it wasn't quite as narrow as what I had seen in other hands. He's doing a lot of these capitals where the shade is in different positions. So he's doing the reverse shade. And that entire alphabet and sort of work from Girault is from this album. So I'm going to stop the share and go here. It's from this album called something, Menon Album Graphique Alphabets. Forgive me. French, something else, and ornamental. Am I close? See if she'll unmute. But inside, what it was,
Sorry.
So it's Français, which probably is the French from France, unless it's yeah. Étranger is people from other countries, and Ornée, I have no idea what that is.
Okay,
Know
but
what they mean.
okay, but thank you.
Album of alphabets, graphic alphabets.
Alpha. And if you get this, it's like the book is a little box, and all of these are individual plates. So they're still, even though I have the actual plate, and I'm going to try and hit focus, it's still very difficult to see the detail. So one of the things that I did was I actually scanned every page and I enlarged it and I had it printed so that I could really study the work that he did. And everything in here, he not only wrote, he engraved, and it's incredible. And you see the side by side of the English round hand next to the more narrow and a little bit softer or poetic Italian hand. But again, he does both. And we don't have a lot of practitioners other than, well, there's Bickham and there are others, but Girault to do this length of work, and certainly his ornamental flourishing, it rivals that of Bickham in the Universal Penman. There's sometimes I look at it and think, I think he might even be better. It's incredible to see what's in there.
Wouldn't the ornate mean the ornamental flourishing?
That's what I hope it means.
That would make sense.
It would make sense. It would make sense. Yeah. All right. So where are we? All right. So I just gave you another couple of images from Girault. And again, this is crazy flourish. This is just beautiful, beautiful script. And this is probably my favorite image with the word harmony, beautiful harmony, and then Italian. It's gorgeous. I absolutely love his work. And from this point on, when I go through the slides, there's a change in what you're going to see. And part of the change is we go over to the US and the hand is developing different. And this is George Becker's 1854. And I do have the book. I didn't pull it out. That book is very fragile. And this is a pretty good scan from the book anyway to look at. But up above, you've got Italian, and below he has what he's calling large text alphabet. And you can see how the shade is narrow on the ascenders and it's being pulled downward. We still have, if you look at the bottom, you can see the roundedness and almost the loops in those M's and N's and K's. So he's still giving us a very gentle approach with that Italian hand. I love it. I really do love this example. And here are his Italian hand capitals, and they're getting, the more reverse shading you get and the more flourished you get, you do lose the legibility of the capital itself. And you can see how the shade is getting a little bit heavier in the capital as well. But Becker starts to lump Italian, the word Italian, with oddly shaded display alphabets. So we start to see not only from Becker, but also in the Zenarian script alphabets, where there's an odd shade position. So remember Billingsley blob and the lateral shades? That's the only kind of thing I can think of that might have led to this weird shading. And I attended a lecture about Tuscan fonts to see if there was any sort of connection between what I know of a Tuscan font that you can see in type specimen books and the word Italian, and there wasn't. So we still have strange alphabets being called Italian. So this is in 1905, Italian square top. There is nothing remotely connected to italic, round hand, any sort of evolutionary key that tells us why they're putting this weird shade and calling it Italian. And Don Marsh and I have talked about this at length, and he, as a typographer, that I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg of weirdly shaded scripts or fonts or type designs that are called Italian. And it happens a lot, and it starts to confuse the hand. Then we've got this one.
Wait,
Yeah, go ahead.
Can we go back to that one?
Yeah,
that
with
you were
the
just on?
ugly X.
Oh, they're all so ugly, but the numbers here remind me of the font designed for the numerals that are on your checks.
Yes,
Um,
that kind of go through computers, right? That
yeah, and
yeah.
I'm guessing that I can't remember who designed that one. My husband knew the name of the person. I don't remember. But a type designer gets influenced by what they see from what people before them have done. And it wouldn't surprise me if the designer of what's on your checks saw this one.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's no redeeming quality of I look hard.
It's
because
making me laugh.
Yeah. It's just this is bad. This is bad. And it gets worse, right? So the ornamental Italian, again, there's just no redeeming. These are circus fonts. These are circus display alphabets. And lumping it with that word Italian did Italian hand no favors whatsoever. But yeah, they're just kind of otherworldly here. And then we have, now I love Spencer. I love Spencer's sons. I don't love what he did, what the boys did, the sons of Spencer did to Italian script. What they did was made the capitals very ornate. I think they're gorgeous actually for Spencerian if you get rid of the shade position. And I'm not actually even opposed to what I see with the sort of that 52-degree slant and the very angular baseline turns that you see of Spencerian. Certainly that A shape, very, very Spencerian. But it's when they do this and they give us a page that is so crazy, and these are very difficult to do accurately. And when I look at this page and the perfection of how these ovals are and the position of all of those ovals, I know that based on what I've seen in other work, that this would have been drawn and then rendered for reproduction. That this is not the free-flowing writing. Everything else that I've shown you up until we got here is handwriting. And when we come here and we're starting to create displays of this kind of twister. Now, Mike Saul is an exception because Mike can do twister caps that are just out of this world. To do a page of this perfectly, I still would say that this is a drawn page that is then rendered for reproduction and heavily retouched to get the perfection of the shade in the same position. Yeah, I've seen too many examples of retouching to think otherwise. And then this, 1914, from my W.E. Dennis book, Studies in Pen Art. Love W.E. Dennis, do not like at all what he did to Italian hand. And what he gives us is, other than the script that you have in Italian in capitals, we don't even have a lowercase. And when you lose the lowercase, you lose the hand entirely. And by 1914, the hand had completely been absorbed by Spencer's system. So Spencer's system completely took over, along with other writing systems. Italian hand dropped out of use. However, I found a love for it when I was studying it for my guild. And I looked at other influences, and one of the influences that Brian Walker gave me before he passed away was Ramon Sterling's work from the 1800s. So I draw from a lot of Spanish resources to try and get the script the way I like. I love these, absolutely love these capitals. And Brian gave me this sheet. And if you look at it, this was far before I found Jules Girault. But Girault is the artist who does this particular alphabet. So it's no wonder that I fell in love with these capitals. And it's sort of, these are the ones that I draw on when I'm doing my own Italian hand. And again, I'm giving just that nod to Girault. So armed with those sources that I looked at, from Bickham to Ayres to Girault, and making the connection with Ramon Sterling that Brian gave me, and playing with nibs. So I used to use a Gillot 303, a Gillot 404, and a Hunt 22. Those were the three nibs I used almost exclusively until I found my current nib, which is a Hunt 21. But I've got this image in here because if you change the nib and change the flexibility of the nib that you're using, you're going to change the script that's on the page. So you can edit your own handwriting and your own approach to Italian hands simply by changing the nib. And this is where I've put in some of my own work. So this is kind of an angled shot of how the work evolves over time. This is one of those pages where I told you I just have fun. I write pages of names, or pages of flowers, something that makes me happy. And again, that playful approach. And they don't have to be perfect. They're not going to be perfect. They should flow. And I don't know, I've just had the most fun with this hand and found so many avenues to use it. So again, to go back to my my floral background, I'm going to find a way to combine the hand with that which I love to do, which is offhand flourishing. And again, I don't use flourishing to detract from bad writing. It can't save bad writing. You can have a lot of fun with merging both things, knowing that we aren't machines, we're not mechanical, we do our best on every page. And I don't think it's ever a bad idea to add flowers. I just don't. I try to have fun with the capitals. So if I like the shape of an Italian hand capital, I might start to embellish that with flowers. Both of these are from a workshop that I do called Fainting Fancies, where I simply take a shape of a letter that I found in Italian hand and embellish it with florals. This is from a workshop I just completed where it was called The Vintage Page, where we spent a period of time really studying Italian hand and then combining it with something else. And it can be illuminated. So I've got gold leaf illuminating that. I've got a little bit of an illustration. The script itself is gentle, so you've got to keep the ornament on the delicate side, but it's a very, very versatile hand. Probably one of my favorite quotes that I've ever come across. I have no idea who wrote these words, because the book itself I took it from does not have an author attributed to the book. The book is called Little Gray Men, and the author, it's attributed to somebody just with the initials BB. So I don't know, but it's a story of the trek of these little gnomes that have lost their friend, and they're trying to find it. And it's one of the most beautiful quotes to write and practice in Italian hand. And one of the things I do when I am writing and practicing in that whole Vintage Page workshop, if I flip back here to my I use just a notebook. This is an Apika notebook, and they're thin. It's excellent Japanese paper, and I use a bulldog clip to just lay it flat. And I practice without any sort of goal to be perfect. I just do the writing in the book. And sometimes just from that writing, I will get the layout, that informal way of getting a layout. And I'm just going to flip back through a couple of pages. So what you'll see is here's a layout I got just from writing. And if I like how it ends up in this sort of vertical approach, I'll take a measurement and create my layout with no fuss and no bother. And it sort of has been a door opener for many people that found it intimidating to do a layout. Is just write in a journal. Your journal doesn't judge you, but we're just going to flip back a couple of pages. And every page that I do, depending on what I'm writing, it takes on a different sort of personality. Now I know Glenda is in the class. I saw she joined. I didn't see you come in, Glenda, but Glenda was in that vintage page class, and she kept coming up with these fun words to write, whether they were cakes or candies or I think it was kind of over the fall season and pumpkin spice and things like that. So I had fun just writing fun words. Alexandra, the name of the notebook is Apika. Apica. And Alin, here in Ontario, we can get these at Chapters or Indigo, I guess it's called now. And they used to be all on the shelf at $3.93. They're now $6 something. But they are such wonderful books, and I change my ink. I don't care who sees this. This isn't about being seen. This is about letting a script evolve and just having fun with your pen without the pressure of being perfect. We have to play. There's no guideline here other than the baseline. So some of that rigidity, some of the possibilities of playing happen when you go onto a little journal like that. You can't work on a thick journal because your hand gets into a very uncomfortable position the further back you go. But this nice flat book, it's just been an absolute joy to practice in. So I wanted to share that, and I actually got some words for tonight that we can work on. Let me just get you the last couple of images, and then we're going to stretch our legs. So my mantra is taken from Brian Walker, and it is study, practice, reflect. And Brian, I wish he was still around so we could talk about things, but he encouraged me to look at examples. And after I looked at my examples, then I practiced. And after your time of practice, then you reflect. But he also taught me to be incredibly kind with my critique. So when I look at my work, it may need all kinds of help in the world, but I have to find what's good in it before I rip it apart. So if this practice wasn't joyful, why would I do it? There are so many other things in this world. If my practice was boring and drudgery, I'd be knitting. I'd be going back to my embroidery. I'd do something else. The very fact that you're here means you have this inherent interest to do something like this and to engage in it. Otherwise, why would we do it? It just doesn't make sense. So I get that from Brian, and I try to sort of infuse my workshops with this this feeling that we can do our writing with this sense of joy and this sense of hope, and always chasing beauty. It's never going to be perfect. We would use a font if we wanted this to be an absolutely rigid and perfect mechanical thing, but through our writing, through our artwork, through what we put on the page, we have something to offer and to bring to, oh, I would say, to the world, to people that are hurting, to people that need a message of a card in the mail, something that makes them happy. How happy was Lynn to get something in the mail from Anne? There's just a joy that happens. And if anybody has ever received a card, you know what it means, that somebody thought of you and sent a card. And I put this image in because from that very first image from the Universal Penman, saw the beauty of Italian Hand, knowing that it had a bad rap, or when I started to talk about it and kind of dig into it, I was told in no uncertain terms to leave it alone, that was a terrible script and it deserved to die. And I just didn't agree, because I saw something so beautiful, and we all have this perspective and a beauty that we could bring to this hand. My Mae West quote, and I think I gave you this in the other lecture I did last year, but too much of a good thing can be wonderful. And I practice Italian Hand with a joy. I can't wait to do it. If I can't do it every day, I miss it. And it's very difficult for me to say that about other scripts. I just want to be there practicing. I want to be there playing with it and seeing what it'll do. And Poetic Pen, Anne said there's 2 spaces left, and you would be most welcome if you wanted to join in, even if you are an absolute beginner, even if you've never played with the pointed pen. There's a poetry that you can find with this hand. And if you ever wanted to study another hand, another script hand, I firmly believe that Italian Hand is the best way to start. You learn so much from it. And with that being said, happy Valentine's Day. I had to put a heart in there. And my hope always is that through a lecture, through writing, through whatever we do with the pen, is that you will flourish. So thank you for your attention. I'm going to stop the sharing. We're going to come back here. Are there any questions? Anne found a peek of notebooks on jet pens. What was the price?
I didn't think they were horrible.
They're not. They're
$6.
$6?
$6 for a B5. So that's little, right? The biggest size they had was A5.
So I don't know those sizes. So this one is 10 by 7. So is that?
So 10 by 7 is pretty close to an A5. Yeah.
Okay, so A5. You know what? I think I bought 17 of them when I saw that they were $3.93. And I just love that. I know Manon uses them. It is wonderful, wonderful. And your ink doesn't bleed through. So this is all fountain pen ink. This entire book is fountain pen ink, minimal ghosting of an image through it.
So the A5 is 8 by 5, 8 by 6 inches, and it's $2.80.
Wow. Yeah.
And B5, what did they say the specifications are? The B5 is 10 by 7 inches.
Yep.
And the paper is 142 grams. No, 81 GSM. So it's not terribly light.
It's better than my Moleskine. It's better than my Lutern journal. It's just, this is wonderful paper. Jean said she might have seen it at a Japanese Daiso store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you can get different colored covers.
Oh, I know. Yeah, yes.
It is from Japan.
Is it from Japan? They're
Yes.
wonderful.
And the supplier in Canada is Indigo. They have all different sizes.
They do. They have little tiny ones for your purse, and it's just it's wonderful. It's
And
wonderful.
they say here the feature is it's acid-free paper that's fountain pen friendly.
It really is. It's really good. And it will give your practice a different point of view than just having all these, like, I mean, there's something to be said for this kind of practice, but I just like having it all in a book rather than files and files of all these pages, it's easier for me.
Yep. The Goulet Pen Company has them, and they look even cheaper than jet pens.
Yes, but we have to pay tariffs to get it to Canada.
Ah,
Yeah.
I'll smuggle it over the border for you.
We could get them at Indigo, Lynn. We're okay.
Yes, yes.
So any questions? Why don't we take our 5-minute break and come back and we'll do a little bit of writing and playing and maybe we'll get your trading cards sorted out well, they have till Wednesday, right? To get them to you, Ann?
Yep.
Yeah.
Otherwise, work on the next month.
Work on March.
Yep.
Oh, would you show the front of the Young Clerks again? Yep, here it is. This isn't expensive, so if you don't have this book, it's not expensive at all. And there's other stuff in it. I just really used 2 pages. All right, so why don't we how long do we usually give them for a break, Ann?
Let's do 10 minutes. Does that sound fair? And then we'll start at 8:25 Central, 9:25 your time.
Sounds good.
All
See you in
right.
10.
We need the pen and ink and a paper.
Can you see? Yeah, if you come back with pen and paper, even pencil and paper, we'll have a bit of a play. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
All right. See you in a couple minutes.
Lovely.
Thank you.
like letters, but you don't like those crazy flourishes. But can you suggest, like, isn't any manual to, because it's hard to follow those like elaborate ornamental borders? Is it any way to learn how to do that?
To do their way, I have never, let me see if I can get that book. Where we
Yeah, because you said you're not fascinated by them, and you're fascinated by, letter forms.
I flourish almost everything. I'm trying to get my portfolio out. I flourish almost everything, but I don't flourish it their way. So what I do is, and we'll do that, right? Because we can just have a little bit of a play, but I will take flourishes from my studies with Michael Saul, and Michael Saul was the penman who taught me how to flourish, and I just started going crazy with flourishes. And he will remember the story of when I told him I want to put roses and flowers in my work, and he kind of said, well, good luck with that. Because he's not that person. He's not a person who is into flowers and leaves and roses. But for me, I wanted to find a way to add embellishment. So if I'm going to do a border, now let me pull something. I wasn't planning on this, but I'll do it.
Can somebody hit record?
It is recording.
Okay, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
So if I'm going to do, this is a gilded and rinceau border that I combined with Italian hand. So this is one approach. So Anne was showing all those trading cards. So for me, the hardest thing is always the words. But even if you just have a single word and just start to come in with some embellishments, you can start to bring everything to life. So here's another one I've got just started. So I threw, again, from my journal. So where'd that go? Honestly, the layout was right there, just from the morning writing. And then it got transferred over to a border design, and I've got butterflies I've got to work on and get in there. But you can put any type of ornament in a border as long as you give it an edge, give it a distance away from the lettering. So I hope I'll show you a little bit of how I incorporate very simple things in with words. But it's very hard because I don't like that type of ornamental flourishing that I showed you from that one book, which I have no idea where I put. I try and tidy up in between. So it's somewhere, but that is, I'll pull this book.
Yeah, because those ones are crazy. You don't know where's the beginning, where's the end. They're just like endless, just and so
Yeah.
complicated. And that's what is.
Like even
Yeah,
a
I mean,
dog, or yeah, I wouldn't do that. I would do or that. I wouldn't put a weird face. I wouldn't put a naked lady on a horse. Like,
Oh,
there's
I
just-
would. I would put the skulls and naked horses on the girls. That's what I would do.
You could, but if you really wanted to do something like that, you could take an outline and fill it, do an infill of flourishing if you wanted to do something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Okay.
But I like to go to like the quotes that I do, the words that I use, their nature, or there's something they're usually something gentle. I'll flourish a bunny, but I won't do like a monkey or something like that. I just like to do woodland things, I guess, squirrels and bunnies and things like that. So hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, so what did I give you? So did they get this, Anne? Did I send?
No.
We don't
That
get
should
it.
They didn't get it?
Hang on.
No.
But I can pop it into chat.
Yeah, let's give them stuff.
Give them stuff.
And if you can't find it, I'll find it.
I got it.
You've got this beautiful page.
It's the one Poetry in Motion, right?
Yes, the Poetry in Motion one, not the big handout. Yeah.
Yeah, this is 7
But
pages.
when if you say goodbye and chat will disappear, how we gonna print it?
I'll email it to you.
So let's have a little bit of a play, and I'm just going to pull, I'm not going to worry about guidelines or anything like that. I'm just going to pull a couple pages of my, this is just graph paper. You don't need graph paper. I just have a hard time drawing a straight line if I don't have graph paper. I'm ruler challenged. So graph paper, just so that's what I'm going to work on. I know this takes Inkwell. When I'm doing formal lettering or really working on a layout, I would use layout paper. And the layout paper that I use is the Daler A4. But I'm just going to start and do a little bit of writing and a little bit of flourishing, and hopefully we'll get your trading cards done, and Anne will get all kinds. Okay, so before I write, now I wrote prior to our lecture, and that was a while ago. So I have, I'm going to do a little bit of a warm up. And normally when I do a warm up, I use a mechanical pencil. But that never, this one needs lead. So we won't. I'm just going to use a Blackwing because this is actually going to show up on the paper. But I just start on my paper, so whatever writing paper you have with a pencil. And my warm-up usually consists of some ovals done in a counterclockwise direction. You can go clockwise, but I just don't usually do things in that direction. Normally I go in a clockwise direction. And this, the shape of this is not terribly important. We're not trying to have a drill. We're just trying to have a really, just wake up our shoulder a little bit. Now you notice that my fingers are still, and I'm actually moving my shoulder. So if I do this, let's try this. Flip the camera down and we'll go, hopefully there's not stuff all over. Let's go here. Okay, so you can see me at my desk and you can't see my paper, but you can see this motion. So when I make these ovals, this is moving. My shoulder's moving. When I'm writing smaller things, the shoulder is still moving. The fingers are still, but the shoulder is moving. My elbow is off the side of the desk. See if you can see it. Maybe not. Maybe you can't. But it's not up in the air. I'm not awkward, and I can bend at the waist. I can take a breath. I can bend at the waist, and I'm comfortable. And I can write for hours without fatigue. I can flourish. I can do all my work without fatigue because I bend at the waist and I don't try and carry tension in my shoulders. So let's go back to the camera. So keeping that in mind, when you look at my fingers, they're actually not moving. It's the forearm, and I'll back out a bit. The forearm is actually resting, and this is a guard sheet. And even if I write in my little journal, I have this guard sheet under my hand. Right? So it doesn't get any oils from my hand transferred to the paper. So we're just going to do some of these ovals. And it's not a race. you have to kind of think about writing it as being in your pace of your breathing and your thinking. So when you're writing, you're not writing like this. You're not going fast and crazy. You're usually writing at a more controlled and relaxed pace. And when I do this warm up, pay attention to how much pressure you're actually putting on the paper. So if you run your finger along the back, you shouldn't actually feel any evidence of the pencil here. So I'm just going to start with a couple of those, and the purpose of this is just to get my mind engaged with the writing and to get rid of any angst or jitters. And I'm also going to do a couple of these lateral figure eights. And again, that's the shoulder moving. And then I do some upright figure eights. And I'll talk about this in the class with a lot more, a little bit more emphasis on what I actually think when I'm doing this. But I'm trying to kind of get into my head and outside of any anything else that's distracting me. I'm trying to just find that pathway in my mind that's dedicated to writing and flourishing and kind of live there, if that makes sense. Okay. So when I've done that, I make the switch to ink. And for the purpose of practice and demonstrations, I'm using a fountain pen ink, and this is Sailor Manual ink, and this color is called Uri, and it's like a moss green. And Sailor fountain pen inks are very gentle on your nib. I do a lot of writing, and pointed pen nibs, if you use an iron gall ink, which is formulated for pointed pen, it will actually break down your nib very quickly. So I am using a straight holder instead of a quill, a Hunt 21 nib, which is a medium flexible nib. And if you use a straight holder, you can get away with a lot of things if you use a plastic straight holder, but if you use a good straight holder, people collect, there's artisans, I make my own straight holders, Chris makes them, I paint them. And I never store the pen nib in a straight holder. So try and remove it at the end, because even with the best care, those straight holders you want to protect as long as you can. Now we use a stainless ferrule in ours, but sometimes even with the best of care, your ferrule can kind of break down over time. When the pen is prepared, so I broke out a new nib tonight, but when I prepare a nib, I usually pass it through a flame. And you only have to do this once. I just did it again to demonstrate. And then when you dip the pen, you dip it far enough that the eyelet is filled. So I'm just going to shake that off. I think I dripped all over the top of the ink bottle. And then I'm going to do those same strokes. No pressure. Lateral figure eight. And everything that I'm doing, I start to tune into what is happening on the paper. So I'm listening to the sound that the ink is making on the paper. I'm paying attention to my pen nib, so I don't want it to be all scratchy. If you hear a lot of scratching or if it's splaying, you might want to change your pen angle. So rather than having it very upright, you lower the angle of the pen so it's a little bit flatter to the page. Okay, and I'm just going to transition to a couple of strokes. We don't have the time to go through the whole alphabet or anything like that. But we do have time to explore some of the characteristics and strokes of the alphabet. So I'm just going to put down, I'm just going to work on this page. I will go over to a guide sheet. You did get some, but I don't think everybody's going to be able to print stuff off. But let me just show you some basic strokes. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of an area. So I'm just going to use my ruler here. So I just used a graph line here. And if this is going, this would be a huge letter, but I will just, for the sake of this demonstration, show you this. So if this is my X height and I was creating an O, it would go in that X height, right? So there's the baseline. The middle space is the X height. And then this would be the waistline. And just for the sake of the demonstration, I went up 2 squares, and that would be the top of the ascender. And the bottom of down 2 squares would be a descender. And in that little handout that Anne put in the chat, there's some guide sheets. And tomorrow, if you're in the workshop, the guide that I'm going to be using, and this depends, like my printer, when I printed this tonight, actually printed it out smaller than what I use, but I normally use guide sheet C, but I gave you larger ones as well, so that might be easier for you to use, which is a guide sheet A. Or you can use any of your favorite guide sheets. I just wanted to show you some of the easy strokes that you can do. So let's just knock that in.
But for this kind of hand, you don't for warm up. You don't do mics like
No,
space drill exercises.
absolutely not. Yeah. So that will give you Mike's, those cross drill exercises are excellent for Spencerian, but I don't use any sort of drill for this hand at all. So I didn't get into the different systems of handwriting that evolved, but Spencerian's script is how do I say it? It's a much more rigid system than what I find in Italian hand. So this is you don't need to, this is enough. And I'm going to give you the basic strokes also as a bit of a warm up. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to start with some basic strokes. So if this was my ascender line and this was the baseline, I'm just going to go straight up and down with some pressure at the top and then releasing at the bottom. Straight up and down. And you're trying to get that blot, sort of that rounded shape and not a squared shape. So if you do a lot of engrosser script, you might automatically be squaring the top. That will work itself out the more Italian hand that you do. So you would just start with that blot and pull down. And there's way more nuances that we will do in the class itself, but I'm just going to give you some basics to start. We can even do a pressure, release, pressure, pressure, release, pressure, pressure, release, pressure. And you get that blot at the top and that blot at the bottom. Somebody has to go. Beth has to go. Bye, Beth. Thanks for coming. So
Bye,
Angela,
Heather.
bye, sweetie. Thanks for coming.
I'll see you next month.
Sounds good. Ciao,
All
sweetie.
right. Take care.
Take care. So Angela's new to copper plate and struggle. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. This is much easier. All right. So I'm not going to show you all the ascenders. We'll write a little bit and I'll talk about it as we analyze it. But I will show you, let's just do a J. So if I mean, I want slant lines here, but if I just start. And I'm doing this fairly upright, by the way. So I've added a little bit of pressure. I'm not worried about slant at the moment. I'm just showing you some strokes. And you've got this beautiful kind of open stem loop, and that hairline is very delicate. So in Italian hand, you have this deposit of ink that forms a blot, and you've got a very graceful stem loop or ascender. And again, there's tons that we can go over, but time does not permit that. I'm going to draw a huge O. So the O in Italian hand, if this was a clock, it would start at about the 1 o'clock position, and I come around and I make a fairly narrow O. And when you join, you actually meet it with a blot of ink. And I always think that this is a guy with a toupee flying off in the wind. Poor guy, hardly has any hair. But that's again that 1 o'clock position, this oval shape, come around and blot. So if I'm going to make that in the X height, oval, come around and blot.
Heather,
Yeah.
can you show how much of a slant your paper is?
Yeah. Yeah. To me, how much a slant the paper is to me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll try and do this in the okay. If I can. It's hard to see. So the bottom left, I get my left and right mixed up, sorry. The bottom left-hand corner of the paper is pointed toward the middle of my body. So what I'll do, I'll show you this. And I'll actually put this larger guide sheet here. So in that little packet download, you have various guide sheets. And this large one, guide sheet A, and again, it depends on your printer as to how many millimeters that is. I don't even worry about stuff like that. I worry about what is comfortable for me to write. This is a 55-degree slant, and this is the X height. This is your slant. This is the waist, ascender, and descender. And then you go into the next block. And I line up that slant, so I turn it on an angle so that that point is pointing at my midsection. Does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so if I'm going to do that, and I've got that paper here. Here's one I've got. Line. All right. And this is, again, I will go into this in detail, but I never work on a light box. It's very, very fatiguing for your eyes to work on a light box. And I never work on a paper that has the guidelines printed on it. I don't. The most I work with, and this goes back to my training with Mike Saul and Brian Walker, and I'm grateful to the two of them. Mike, if you've seen him in action, has a baseline, and that's it. He does not, he never has handed down this rigid guideline thing. And Brian Walker was the same way. Brian Walker was an incredible practitioner of italic, and he was part of the Society of Italic Handwriting. And he worked with a baseline most of the time, but sometimes for his most formal work, he would work with the baseline and the X height. So it just, I never put everything down, so I'm going to lock that focus. If you put everything down, so if I decided, okay, I'm going to have the baseline, this, I have to have all the slants, I have to make sure everything is perfect, you are giving yourself iron bars for your handwriting instead of giving it that ability to flow. So I think that this is the easiest way to work, where I've got this ghost image of the guide sheet coming back behind, but I don't have it all on the front of the page. So it's not rigid. It gives you a gentler approach. And then this is the guard sheet. And where did I put my little booklet that had all my writing on it? Find it. We'll practice some words. And I'll analyze them for you again as we go through it. Okay. Find it. Well, can't go too far. All right, well, I'm going to wing it. All right, these are fun words. Okay, say it is Valentine's Day and somebody gave us a package of chocolates and fondants. So in our package was vanilla cream. Okay, you got to start with vanilla. So I'm going to do a capital and I'm going to go into the lowercase at the same time. So when I'm doing a capital V, I am, again, the position of the paper, it is angled toward my body, and I'm just going to reposition the camera so you don't see it crooked. And I'm going to start that V at the top of the ascender with a little bit of pressure. Create this really graceful letter. And end with just a little blot of ink. And that O that I showed you, the A is the same. You start at that 1 o'clock position, come up, blot. The N, where I'm just adding a little bit of pressure at the baseline. I'm going to retrace up. Pressure. Now, I have not shown you this ascender, but one of my favorite ascenders starts with this lateral stroke. And then I come back and I meet that hairline. So this is a sweeping ascender, and I'll write the word and then I'll major on the component. And again, if you're in the workshop tomorrow, we get to spend time with that. And the second letter is different. 1 o'clock position, blot. And now I'm going to explain what I just did. So when I have a double L, like we started with something tricky, I usually do different ascenders. And I don't love this join here. This, I sort of started at the waistline, so I'm going to write it again. Again, I'm going to do a capital V. We're all going to want chocolates. My A in that 1 o'clock position, blot, into my N, retrace up, blot. I'm just going to go into my L. I'm going to go into my L. I did a breakaway there. And again, I've got two non-identical L's, blot. And if I do a little retouch up there, I have a different ascender than this one. And that's one of the things that we get to do in Italian hand is really play with those ascenders. So looks like I'm going to show you a couple. So when I start with this lateral stroke, all hairline, little bit of pressure and release, you've got at the baseline almost like an open safety pin. So if you think about what a safety pin looks like, that's the shape that we're looking at the baseline turn, that sort of open shape safety pin. And this sweeping ascender forms this oval shape. And you notice that you can see the ascender line underneath, but I actually go above the ascender line. I can do an ascender stroke starting at the top with a fish hook, adding a little bit of pressure at the bottom. And again, it's that safety pin shape. Safety pin. So again, fish hook. If I meet the fish hook and pull back and add that little blot of ink, I have shaded that stroke. So it's just, when we started with vanilla, which I thought was an easy word, we got double L, so I got to play with it a little bit. You can also start your L at the waistline. And again, there's that open safety pin look at the bottom. And you're going to form the shading or that little blot of ink with that retouch at the top. You can also come up, blot, blot, and just have a plain stroke like that. So now, let me just get my baseline in. And somebody's laughing. Okay. I'm going to get my baseline in here. And I'm going on every other group just so this is a little bit easier to see. Let's write vanilla cream again, now that we know some L's. my N with a little bit of the shading on an N in Italian hand is on the first stroke, but not on the second stroke. I'm going to blot, and I want that sweeping ascender stroke. And then I'm going to go right into that other loop. So I've got two different loops. I'm going to put a little terminal lobe. I'm going to shade and a dot. And I'm going to write the word cream, and then I'm going to analyze this, and then we're going to move on and do a trading card. I think I cut my trading cards to the wrong side, but that's fine, wrong size. All right, and here's the word cream. So I'm going to start with a sweeping ascender or entry stroke into a C with a little bit of shade. I'm going to do a running R, 1 o'clock position for the A. Shade the first stroke, shade the second stroke of the M. But that's it. And then a little bit of a flourish. Now, I can come back on the C and add a retouch. Now, if you are in the class tomorrow, we're going to go over everything. It's just hard in a demo to kind of give you the ins and outs quickly. I can add a little bit of shade on the E. So what are the dynamics? So here in the word vanilla, that double L, that's a technique called differencing. I'm just going to write differencing. Hopefully I spelled that right. So differencing is an easy technique to do when you have double letters rather than trying to do two identical letters. This little dot or blot of ink, that was a retouch, and it's called a terminal lobe. And it's some really delicate dynamic additions that you can give to your work that give it a little bit of a sparkle and a little bit of a glow. It's what distinguishes it from other hands. And there's interrupted shading or unusual shading on letters like N and M, also in H, where in Spencerian, when you're writing Spencerian, there's usually a little bit of shade on the exit of an N or an M or an H. But in Italian hand, the shading is on the first stroke, and in M, the second stroke. So no, you don't need the cards for tomorrow. I think in day 2 of the class, like once we get through all the majuscules in on Sunday, then we'll do a little piece. And I actually was going to work on 5x7, but when Anne was talking about the little trading cards, that hey, they can just do a single word, and that might be great for the sake of the demo. So when you write them, the words together, you just get a little bit of idea of what the nuances are. So in the A, when I blot that ink at the top, it actually infills a little bit and gives you that idea of the shading. So the shading in Italian hand is a little bit different than other letters, other hands. So if I'm going to just run through the ABCs really quickly without the detail that I'll give you in the class, but we're going to start at 1 o'clock. And we've got a nice narrow little A. And I blot the ink when I join. So it's so forgiving. If anybody has done English round hand and you're struggling with the oval and where you begin, when you begin in that 1 o'clock position and come around and then meet it with a blot of ink, it absolutely closes the gap there for you. I'll do just a simple B. I'm going to come up from the waistline, blot, blot. Just have a simple little B. I'm going to start with a downstroke and create a C. And in that little handout I gave you, you've got ABCs and some little words to write, some Valentine words. So the A, the D, the G are very similar letters. So the D, if I start in that 1 o'clock position and I'm just going to come around, I'm just going to do a simple D like that. Again, we'll get into far more tomorrow. The E, I create a C and then come back and create the eyelet. And the F, if I start at the baseline and come up, and I'm just going to create a very simple F for this demo. And I've added this retouch up there. Create that little blot of ink. One o'clock position for the G, come around, and then I blot and pull down into that stem loop, which crosses below the baseline. We'll do that sweeping ascender for the H, pressure at the baseline, retrace up into a narrow exit, and it is unshaded on the exit. And again, I know I'm doing these really fast. You'll have way more time tomorrow. But anybody who's not joining the workshop can at least get a little bit of insight into the hand. I'm going to come up with pressure, come down with pressure at the baseline, just a tiny bit for the eye. The J we saw, but I'll do it again. Pressure. I'll give you a very simple K, but there are many, many variations of the K. So I started with that sweeping ascender into that little exit. Lots of retouching, and I'm doing very delicate retouching to get that little, those little blots of ink. Let's do the fish hook for the L. Come down with a little bit of pressure, pressure to blot, pull back with a terminal low. Down with pressure for the M, retrace up, down with pressure, retrace up, exit with no pressure. And it's a slightly compressed, narrow form of M. When you compare, if you do get that one resource, the Young Clerk's Assistant, and just compare the difference between English roundhand and just that one page, you see a difference in the compression and the spacing. The N will do the same thing. One o'clock position for the O, blot. Now, the P, I have a lot of fun with that, along with the K in the workshop, but I'll give you a really easy one here. You just come up from the waistline, just come slightly above the waistline, and then down below on slant. And you've got that little eyelet of pressure at the top and at the bottom. And we're just going to come across and a little lateral stroke at the bottom. I love that little dot in there. One o'clock position for the Q, blot. Nice little exit. It doesn't quite meet. I mean, I'm going to show you variations of that. But this is just a fun little one where it doesn't quite meet. I'm going to come up for the shouldered R slightly above. It goes slightly above that waistline. We're going to come up, a little bit of pressure, and I'm going to do a lateral stroke along the baseline that I pressurize as I pull laterally. Now, again, I'll get into that, but you can create shade with a lateral movement, and that is sort of that Billingsley move that we see in his work. The T, I'm going to come up, add pressure. I'm going to come back to the center and release. So it's like you're creating a little open eyelet at the bottom. And it does not quite go to the top of the ascender line. You can do them differently. If you want a taller T, you can come up, down, and just cross slightly above the waistline. I prefer this one. The U, I'm just going to come around with a slightly curved entry blot, and you get that beautiful rounded blot at the top. V is similar, but you blot and pull to the right. The W is just crazy. It is an N, so pressure, come around and release. You might not recognize it now, but by the end of tomorrow, you'll understand that W. Here's that X I told you about. We're going to come out and do eyelet, cross through and do another eyelet. Easiest X. And let's do the Y and the Z. So I'm going to start with that V shape, come up, and I'm going to blot, pull it into that stem loop that crosses underneath the baseline. And I'll do the easiest Z, which is just this arch back. Okay, so that was like the lightning round of lowercase. And again, I will talk about that in detail tomorrow, but for your ATC, I'm just going to get myself a baseline. I saw people had written the word dream. What do you do with them, Anne? Do you do like an exchange or what?
Yes, we do. So people get them in the mail on or around the 11th. And it takes about a week to 10 days for them to get to me from around the country. And then On a Wednesday night, I put them all out on the dining room table and I do an exchange and put them into stamped and self-addressed envelopes and send them back.
Oh,
So if you send 6 cards, you'll get 6 cards back.
that is so cool.
Love-
And that was nice what you said. Like sometimes that's the only artwork that you get to do, you know?
Yep. Yep.
Very cool. All right, so here I've just have roughly got my baseline and X height, and it's Valentine's Day. I'm just going to write the word love, and I've switched over to Iron Gall ink because any type of artwork, your fountain pen ink is just not going to cut it. You have to use gouache or actual ink. So I'm going to make sure the ink's working. That would have been embarrassing. Okay, and off to the side, whenever I start to work with Iron Gall ink, I do have water off to the side. Okay, and I'm going to write the word love. So I'm going to do a beautiful capital L. I'm going to pull it out. So I've got the L going below the baseline, pulling down from the top, coming around and adding a little bit of a flourish. And then I'm going to write the word love. I'm going to put a little bit of a flourish. Okay. So from here, the type of flourishing that I would do, well, I'm just going to pull a little cartouche out to the side. So rather than that crazy ornamental flourish, I'm just going to pull a little compound curve. Beside it, I'll do a secondary stroke. So the flow of Italian hand works with the way I do offhand flourishing, where I interrupt the shade and I'm not completely pulling a shade from top to bottom. And I think that's why they work so well. And I'm adding just these little hairlines. Apologies if somebody has never done a cartouche before, but you're familiar with Mike's work, and ornamental cartouches are just made out of compound curves, and we're trying to make the ovals beautifully rounded, or not rounded, but beautifully graceful. So I've got a compound curve coming out that side, a nice cartouche. Over here, if I follow the arc of the spine in the word love, and I come in with a stroke, and I'm going to turn this into a simple rosebud shape. I'm going right through the lettering with hairlines. So hairlines can cross through hairlines. Hairlines can even cross through your shaded strokes. I would avoid the hairlines going through the blots if I can, because that might be too heavy. And I'm just going to put a couple more different ornamental curves. And these little strokes, these are little backward C's. And I've mirrored that over on the other side. And add a couple more little roses. I'm going to mirror those roses. So the rose itself is a narrow little teardrop shape and a backward C. There's a little leaf, and I'll do another one here. So it's starting to get florally. Remember I told you the florist in me comes out. It doesn't matter what I do. Even though I'm in a different profession now, the flowers hit. They just come into what I do. All right, so I've got a couple of flowers on one side, a couple on the others. I can even come right through the word itself, just with a rosebud itself. And now this is a wheat stroke. So I'm just using the point of my pen to put these little marks down to make the wheat. And they echo, they're not the same shape as the blots of ink in the terminal lobes, but they echo the feeling of the contrast. And I usually end with these little dotted strokes. Any word that you think of. So if you have a place card to make with a name, and again, we're going to go into all the capitals and all that stuff. But the tiniest little embellishment on a card or an envelope, it just elevates the work and makes it so special when you just add a couple of little flourishes here and there. I can't divorce the script from adding, other than when I'm creating exemplars, but even in my journal, I notice that I usually end with a little flourish. It's just part of who I am. It's part of what I like to do, and it's part of how sort of the joy of working with pen and ink works for me is even if it's just a small little word like this, it makes you happy to do this. It's highly addictive, I would say. Pointed pen flourishing with these, even if you just learn a rosebud and little pressure and release strokes like the wheat, is highly, highly addictive.
But you, Heather, you always like to do the counter sleeve there too.
Yes, yes, I like to do acanthus leaves as well. They're very addictive as well. Anything that you like to do, I know I've got, sometimes there's a little butterfly I like to pen flourish in there, but anything you want to do can be added. What you don't want to do is just completely obliterate the script itself. And I could keep building and building and make it bigger. Yeah. So, by the way, the couple of little strokes that I did with McCaffrey are already starting to erode the nib. It's
But can you please show the bottle of that gallbladder ink?
this one? Yeah.
I don't know, gallbladder.
Close. Gallbladder ink, iron gall ink. Close enough.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is McCaffrey's, and by the way, mine is I should actually clean this. But it feels like it's getting thick, and usually I decant more ink into it from a fresh bottle. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of distilled water to it so you can thin it with ink. But this definitely needed a shot of distilled water in it. It's getting so thick.
But I don't understand why you said you have to use it for finished artworks.
Yes. Yes. So fountain pen ink isn't light fast or archival. So if I put this on something somebody was going to put on their wall and sunlight gets on it, it's going to disappear or fade or change color. So whenever I'm doing real artwork with pointed pen, I'm either going to use McCaffrey Black, this one, or McCaffrey Brown. Those are my two favorite. Or gouache. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wish this was, I could do artwork with it. You just can't. Well, you can, but it's not gonna last.
But if you dip into Palace Moon or some sort of Chinese ink, no?
Yep, yep. So.
It will fade?
No. So if you're using Sumi Moon Palace, you're fine. I just don't like using Sumi Moon Palace for pointed pen work because it's too heavy. And I like very delicate work. And if I am using a Sumi Moon Palace, I usually dilute it by 50%. So I put so much distilled water in it that it thins that ink for me. And I've had to use it. So for things that are going to be reproduced, it's better to use than McCaffrey. Yeah. These are good questions. Thank you for those questions. Are there any more questions? I know we didn't get to do a lot with the pointed pen work, but this is the beginning of what I would do with a little trading card. So when that is dry, and it's not dry, but when that is dry, I would take so a couple of pinks and a couple of green colored pencils, and the base of the rose, I usually do with the darker pink. And then I would blend in a little bit of the lighter pink. Okay, so there we go. And the green leaves, the base of the leaf, I would do with the dark green. And this was just done on a little piece of mint green cardstock. Thank you, everybody who's asked questions. And because I think that it really helps everybody when you ask questions. So Manon asked a question in the chat. I think it went directly to me though, Manon, about, maybe she meant it to be just to me, but yeah, when I use gouache, I use Schmincke Calligraphy Gouache, and that is light fast and it's archival, and it, to my knowledge anyway, Manon, and I don't need to use any gum arabic. And the only color I don't use of Schmincke Calligraphy Gouache is black, because if I have to use black, I'm going to use McCaffrey or Chinese stick ink and not gouache. I will use gouache if I need green or blue. I just generally don't use colors for lettering other than those. Does that make sense? Manon, does that help?
Yes, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem. No problem. And hopefully you wanted everybody to know that question, or that, yeah, but
Yes,
thank you.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. But thank you everybody for kind of your attention. I know it's hard to listen to somebody for that long. I'm just going to put one more little detail. Now, what I can't do is erase that baseline and that pencil line until this is thoroughly dry, but this is just the Sakura Jelly Roll Clear Stardust pen. And that just adds a little bit of sparkle. It is so easy to embellish your lettering with a couple of strokes of flourishing. It's so easy to, put somebody's name on a note card and mail it out to them and make them happy, and just do what we do as calligraphers and spread like the joy. This hand, honestly, is such an intriguing and joyful hand. It's an absolute delight to practice, and it's been my incredible pleasure to share it with you. Any questions about that? I know it was kind of a lightning round of doing stuff tonight, but any questions that I can help you with at this point?
So you don't use McCaffrey's black, you use Goldbladder black. You don't use McCaffrey.
Yes,
You
okay,
don't
no,
use-
I know exactly what you mean. So McCaffrey Black is Iron Gall ink.
But that's what you use instead of gouache.
Yes, yes. So if I have to do lettering on a paper or a certificate in black ink or brown ink, I would use one of these. If I have to do a piece that's, say it's all nature and they wanted green ink, I'm not going to use ink. I'm going to use green gouache.
Okay.
Okay. Oh,
Heather,
yes.
I came in late and I'm really sorry I did, but I just have one question and that is the pen holder that you use. Why do you use that holder rather than a oblique?
Okay,
I don't-
so yeah, no, sorry.
I'm not sure why. I know people say, well, use whatever you like. Well, how do you know which you would like?
Okay, so I am a right-handed calligrapher, and the recommended calligraphy tool for pointed pen or for these scripts was always a quill, and the quill does not have a flange on it. And when steel pens came into fashion, they overtook the quill, and it was not the flange on an oblique holder that was the tool that was used. That was a much later invention.
Oh,
I just find that the flange for me gets in the way of my movements. That's not true of everybody, but it's true of me. And the straight holder it sort of equalizes a left-handed calligrapher and a right-handed calligrapher because they can both pick up this tool and use it right off the bat rather than struggling with a flange. But it's such a good question because it is so personal, and you're entirely right. You don't know right away what you want to use, and often you're just being told what to use by an instructor. And my switch to a straight holder came years and years after working with an oblique holder. I just found that the straight holder felt better.
Oh, thank you very much.
No, thank you for the question. It was a great question.
And even for Spencerian, you don't use a oblique holder.
That's right. I use a straight holder even for my Spencerian, and it's just much more comfortable for me to use that. Now, and the other reason was there's a flourishing position that you can put your fingers in with a straight holder that's far easier than an oblique holder. And I do so much flourishing with my lettering that I just keep using the same tool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's so personal that the tool.
Interesting.
Roxanne's going to sleep. That's fine, Roxana. Everybody, I get it.
Any other last questions for Heather? Well,
Thank you
Miss
so
Held,
much.
you did it again, right?
I see. Hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow. Thank you for playing along. Thank you for watching Manon. You've heard this lecture probably 30 times now. But thank you for coming. Everybody who's here, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Heather. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved and listening and asking great questions and working along. Every time I hear Heather talk, I just want to spend more time digging around in old books. It's just magic, right? Class tomorrow will start at 9:30 Central Time. The Zoom room will open up at about 9:15, 9:20. So if you want to pop in a little early and make sure your camera is set up, and that you're ready to go for a 9:30 start. As you can see, Heather is really well organized and time boxes everything. So we stick to our agenda and we move along at a brisk pace. But enough time to play and wander and wonder. So Heather, thank you so much. All of
You're
you that
welcome.
have joined in here this evening, thank you so much. We've had people sign up for tomorrow, so it's really, really exciting. And those of you that are doing the workshop tomorrow, you should have all the handouts. Those of you that joined in this evening, I put tonight's handouts in chat and I also emailed them to most of you. So you've got them to go back and practice and have a look at it and enjoy this delightful evening. So thank you one and all. We will post the video up on our YouTube channel, probably be Monday. And those of you that have attended this evening, we will share that out with you. So thank you so much. Thank you, Heather.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
everybody. Thanks, Sally, for helping to tech host this. And we'll see many of you tomorrow. Otherwise, keep those pens wet and have fun. Thanks, everybody.